Recording in progress. Got it. Okay. All right, so my name is Elizabeth Cote with Schaefer Inspection Service. We are a family-owned and operated company. We've been in business 40 years now. So today I'm going to be talking to you about environmental testing, in particular radon testing. January is National Radon Awareness Month. So that is where the EPA is working towards raising awareness on radon, why it's important to test for it, the health concerns associated with radon. And the reason that January is National Radon Month, part of the reason is because the best time to test your radon is in the winter months. So I'm going to go through this with you. Let's see. This was working. See if I can get this to go. There we go. If at any time anyone has any questions, please raise your hand, interrupt me, not a problem at all. To start off, everyone here who's been in the industry more than a year, more than 5 years, more than 10 years. Okay, so we have a pretty broad level of experience here. Does everyone here know what radon is? Or does anyone not know what radon is? I guess I should ask. Okay, so some of this may be redundant information. I'm hoping some of it is helpful information, useful information. And then I'm also going to get into some other environmental testing, because as home inspectors, there's a lot that we can cover and a lot that we can't cover. So just like everything, there are limitations to the service that we can provide. But to start off, radon, what is it? It is a odorless, colorless gas. It is naturally occurring. It comes from the breakdown of uranium. And what happens is it's a byproduct of uranium. So as uranium breaks down, it turns into radium, which then is broken down into radon, which is a gas. So there are places throughout Connecticut that have higher levels of radon than other parts of the state. Connecticut in general has higher levels of radon than the rest of the nation. Connecticut levels, we have about 1 in 10 homes have elevated levels of radon. And unfortunately, the Guilford area is a very prominent area for elevated levels of radon, in particular, radon in water. So the unit that radon is measured in is PCI/L. It's picocuries per liter of air. It's just like the same way we're measured in inches. That is how you measure radon. It is a class A carcinogen, meaning it's known to cause cancer in humans. It is the second leading cause of lung cancer, the first for non-smokers. So obviously, if you're a smoker, your first cause of lung cancer would be smoking. The second cause would be radon. So there are 2 ways that radon can enter the home. It is a gas. So the first way is through your foundation. Concrete is very porous, so it's very easy for radon to enter the house. And then when it gets inside the basement, it gets trapped there, and it's not as easy for it to then exit the home. The other way that it can enter the house is, as you see here, is through the groundwater, through, if you have a well, that is an additional entry point for radon. If you have a basement that has a sump pump, or a lot of natural settlement cracks or holes in your foundation, those are additional entry points for radon. So it can get in your pipes, whether it's well water, just regular city water, and then through your vents and whatnot. So it is something that is very important to test for. It says here, this is a national average, 1 in 15 homes have elevated levels of radon. Connecticut is higher than that. It's 1 in 10. So this map is very helpful. We have it on our website. We send it out to our clients. The red are the homes that have elevated levels of radon on average, meaning that they are 4.0 or above. So really it's the whole lower portion of the state. A lot of the correlation with that is we're down by the shoreline. There's a lot of rock and ledge. So it's very common to see those levels down more south. And then in Litchfield, Talent, and Windham County, you're looking at between 2 and 4. And then in Hartford County, that's the only county in the state that has an average under 2.0. And then as you can see, Connecticut, tiny little Connecticut over there, that is compared to the rest of the nation. There's parts of the nation that don't even test for radon. We are part of a nationwide inspection networking group, and there are places we have members in our group that are from Florida and Texas. They don't even test for radon. They don't even offer it. It's not important. We also have members that are out in Utah, and one of their biggest additional services, it's a type of test you can do. It's not something that's common here, but it's meth testing. And that is very, very common for them out there. Almost every single home that they inspect, they're doing meth testing for as well, which I found just incredibly interesting. We have never gotten a request to do meth testing, but apparently if you are using meth or making meth in your house, it gets into your the walls, your carpets, and it is very hard to then get it out of the house. So fun fact, radon is more common here than testing for meth. There are a lot of radon misconceptions that we hear. Most of these come from clients that are not aware of radon, but every once in a while we do hear it from real estate agents as well. There's a lot of information on the internet. A lot of it is correct, some of it is not. A few misconceptions that we often hear is that, well, I just sold the house next door, they didn't have radon, so this house doesn't have to be tested for radon. Every house is different, and it all depends on what is going on underneath your foundation. So there could be a uranium vein underneath your neighbor's house and not under yours, or vice versa. And depending on what the setup of your house is, whether you are on a crawl space, slab, full basement, that can also affect what your radon levels are. To go off of that, basement and slabs, a lot of agents will say, well, this house doesn't have a basement, so I don't have to test the radon. That is partially true. You can look at it 2 different ways. So when you have a home with a basement, like I said, concrete's very porous, so it's very easy for the radon to enter the house. But the basement almost acts like a barrier. That is where you're going to get the highest levels of radon. And if you have a house that has a slab, if the radon is entering the house, it's entering it directly into living areas, the first floor, versus a basement, the highest levels would be the basement, not in the first floor. So we still recommend testing whether it's a slab, crawl space, basement. The EPA has set the requirement to test in the lowest livable levels. So we get this a lot also is, why did you put the radon monitor in the basement? It's unfinished, that's not living space. It's not currently, but the next owners could come and finish it and make it living space. So it's whatever is technically the lowest livable space. If you have a crawl space that like you can kind of stand in, but you can't really stand all the way up in, if it's like under 4 or 5 feet, it's not really ideal to test there. You want to test it in more of a living area. Dirt floors also, we see a lot of elevated levels with dirt floors because it's direct access into the earth versus concrete. At least you have a little bit of a barrier. We get a lot of the times, and we can see it in our monitors because we have continuous electronic monitors that give us hourly breakdowns of both the radon, carbon monoxide, but also barometric pressure, relative humidity, and temperature. Those are all environmental components that can affect the radon levels. So if you have, like for example, over Christmas Eve, there was a big storm, very, very high winds. The temperature dropped from, what was it, 50 degrees down to like 10 degrees. We had crazy radon readings because the barometric and the temperature changed so drastically over the course of 12 hours. So we were seeing fluctuations with the radon that directly correlated to the weather conditions. So luckily our monitors as well, you can also pull the weather conditions in, and there's graphs that you can see. So you'll have a radon level and it's pretty consistent. And then you'll see the big storm comes in and the weather starts going like this and the radon starts following almost identically. So if there is any hurricane, a blizzard, any sort of like extreme weather condition, what we tell clients is that's basically going to be your worst case scenario for your radon levels, because clients will call us and they'll say, well, I got an elevated result, but it was during this storm and I can see that there are fluctuations and it went from 3.5 all the way up to 15.5. I don't know what to do. And with radon, you're not going to get a false positive. So with these monitors, most companies are using continuous monitors now. You're able to see those different fluctuations versus back in the day, we were using EPRM canisters, charcoal canisters. It was a passive device. You were getting one reading and that was your whole result. This is going to be an hourly reading. So you're getting an average of at least 48 hours worth of data. But people will ask us, well, I think the sellers opened up all the windows. Is that still a valid test? It's not considered a valid test. You need to have closed house conditions, meaning windows and doors need to be shut 12 hours prior to the test being started and remain shut for the full 48 hours of the test. Normal entering and exiting is fine. We have clients unfortunately call us and say, I had to get a hotel room because I wasn't allowed to stay in my house during the radon test. So we have adjusted how we send out that information to the sellers and the selling agents so they know you can definitely stay in your house. Just when you leave, close the door tight behind you. What we don't want is people airing out their house. So if you're going to be like moving furniture, we don't want you propping open a door to have the door open for an hour and a half. That would not be closed house conditions. We also get the question a lot of, well, the radon's set in the basement, so why can't I open the windows in my bedroom? I'm on the second floor. Because every house has a set pressure. And when you open the window, whether it's on the first floor, second floor, your basement window, you are changing the pressure in that house. And what actually can happen is it causes a vacuum effect because you have this set pressure in your home. And then you go and you open up at the window, it's going to change the pressure and it can actually start pulling any radon gas that's underneath your house up. And we've seen in the hourly breakdowns, you can see the exact correlation of when they open the windows and when their radon started to fluctuate. So sellers, I get it. You don't want to have to pay for a radon test, but keep your windows and doors shut for the full 48 hours. We've had to go back out and retest radon, and then there's an additional charge for that. So you can actually do the opposite of what your intended goal is, which is to decrease the radon levels, and you can actually affect the radon results by unclosing your closed up house. Let's see. This is a very helpful diagram as well. Because the EPA is the action level set at 4.0, that is for your industry, a very set parameter. If you have a result 4.0 or higher, a radon mitigation system should be installed. Typically, it is on the sellers to remediate. The mitigation systems cost anywhere from $1,200 to $1,800. Unfortunately, just like everything else these days, the cost has gone up, and we have to give a pretty wide range of $1,200 to $1,800, and I'm hoping I say $1,200 to $1,800 and people get it closer to 12 and not closer to 1,800. But to keep in mind, 2 to 4 is also something that you want to monitor. So if you're getting a radon result of 2.5, 3.5, really anywhere in the 3s, you want to make sure that you're retesting. So even for you guys that, whether you own a home, you've lived in the home for many years, you tested the radon when you moved in, if you haven't tested in a couple of years, it's important to do so. We have seen fluctuations. I've tested my house, I've tested my parents' house. The owners of the company have tested their house multiple times. They have a radon mitigation system in place. The Schaefers, their average started off at, it was in the mid-20s. They've now gotten it down to 3.5 was the most recent test. And they had to replace the fan to their radon mitigation system this year. And it was actually even lower than that. It was in the 2s. And the fans of the mitigation systems have about a 10-year life expectancy. So you do want to, start paying attention when it's getting near the end of that service life, because it's not going to be as effective. But we tell clients, we have many clients that call and they say, my average was 3.8, which means that you can see in the breakdowns that they will probably have levels above 4, maybe even the 5s, and then they're going to also have levels below. And that's why the average is so important. And they are, they call us and they say, well, what should I do? Well, you have a couple options. If it's something that you feel strongly about, if you have finished space that you're going to have kids playing down there, if you have a workshop, if you have, whatever down in your basement that you're going to be spending a lot of time in, maybe you want to invest that money to have that peace of mind for you and your family, and you can install the system on your own. Most likely the seller isn't going to pay for it because it's not above the action level, but you never know, it doesn't hurt to ask. But prioritize the findings of the inspection, because there may be something that is more costly, like a new roof or a heating system, that you want to have the sellers take care of, and you do the radon at a later date. But what we always tell clients is retest at a different time of year. So especially when you're getting 3.8s in the summertime and the springtime, retest in the wintertime, because radon, because it is a naturally occurring element, it's going to be affected by the environment, and it follows different cycles. So it follows a day and night cycle, and then it also follows a seasonal cycle. So it is higher in the wintertime, partly because the ground is frozen. So we say wintertime right now, it's 50 degrees. It's kind of hard to call this wintertime, but not complaining. However, when it's really cold and the ground is frozen, it's a lot harder for the radon to escape the house because the ground is frozen and hard. When it's softer in the summertime, it's easier for the gas to get back out. So that's one of the reasons that it is higher in the wintertime. Ideally, you want it to be below the 2.0. And you can take some steps other than a full mitigation system if you have levels between 2 and 4, such as sealing up cracks and holes in the foundation. It is something that, depending on how comfortable you are, we say, there are DIY options. Depends on how handy you are. There's some people that they don't want to be sealing up cracks and holes in their foundation. They can hire a handyman to do that. But if you're someone that it's pretty handy, it's not that hard to do. You buy an epoxy from Home Depot, seal up the cracks if there's any holes. Concrete, it settles. So you're going to see settlement cracks, holes, and doing so will, 1, help decrease your radon levels, and 2, also decrease the likelihood of water penetration. So we recommend that depending on the size of the cracks, if they're more than the width of a dime, which is not that big, then you may want to have a professional come in and seal them. But for the most part, it is something that you can do on your own. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, if you have a home that has a sump pump and you don't have a cover on it, installing a cover that can seal, that will also help decrease the radon levels, because when you think about it, the sump pump is basically a hole in your foundation going directly down into the ground. So that is going to be a direct access point for radon. So anything like that. Yeah.
You said something about Home Depot and something you could do yourself. What was it? I kind of missed it.
It's an epoxy. Okay. So I think it's a concrete epoxy. You can get different types though. And it literally comes in like, a caulk gun. It's similar to that. It looks similar to that, but it's specifically for sealing concrete. So there is an epoxy. It has them all listed out. So depending on what type of foundation you have, you can buy specific ones. Mm-hmm. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on radon?
Yeah, you said that if you have some pump, you can seal it. How we can seal it?
So you can buy covers. You can either buy them from the company that installed the sump pump. I'm not sure like what the price point is on that. If it's cheaper to get it online, get it at a Home Depot or a Lowe's, but it's
depends
it's
if
not,
they did it right or not.
Yeah, if they
When
went
it
down
has
to
a
3
some
feet,
pump,
you
you need
need
sometimes to service it, you have to open it. Is it possible?
well, they're
to
covers
open it?
that they lift off.
It's like a cover.
You're not
Oh,
gonna get a full seal of it most of the time where the pipe comes up.
Yeah.
There's a hole that the pipe goes through, which it's not sealed totally.
You can
So
put it in
there
home
is
or
some
something if you want.
air.
There's, yeah, there's some, but it's, having a cover on it will at least,
Yeah, I've got.
it's at least an improvement from having just an open hole. And usually the cover is recommended just as a safety, so you don't like have
Does the
kids, animals.
Does a dehumidifier make a difference at all?
For radon,
Yeah, meaning bringing down the humidity and,
Moving the air on.
yeah,
yes and no. It depends on how humid it is, because the radon monitors that we use do show the humidity levels.
right.
And technically, you're supposed to turn off your humidifiers when you test radon. You're not supposed to have dehumidifiers, even like central vacs, you're not supposed to have those going.
What do you do for testing then if it's gotta be 12 hours off before and then 48 hours during? And the house has a humidifier and furnace system set up down there.
There are certain things that,
Can't change.
yeah, they're just,
Oh, yeah,
you're,
just-
yeah, but we,
What's
ideally, the inspector will. Basically, if it's a vacant house, that's different. When it's an occupied house, that's where we run into, I don't want to say trouble, but we've had sellers call us unhappy. You turned off my, dehumidifier in my basement, and I have that on for a reason, which is fair. So we try to let them know that we will turn it off when the technician comes to pick it back up. We'll turn it back on for you. Some of them are programmed, so we can't mess around with them. But if we can turn them off, we will. We'll do everything in our power to make it as valid of a test. You're also, one of the things that we see a lot in vacant homes, especially homes which, in the last couple of years, that we haven't had houses sitting on the market for years. But there was a time period where we did have houses sitting vacant, closed up for years at a time. And then you're testing a radon and you're doing mold testing and you're getting these elevated results because there's no one living there. There's no one maintaining it. So you do want to mimic living conditions to an extent. So
There are some tools for, measuring the radon in air. That's a couple of $100. Are they accurate? It's a digital.
are you talking about a monitor, the monitoring ones?
Yeah.
So there's two types of radon monitors, short-term tests and long-term tests. The short-term tests are what we're using, which means that they are a minimum of 48 hours. The monitors that we in particular use have a maximum of 79 hours because that's just the storage on the device. Some of the newer, like brand new devices can do more than that. 79 hours is more than enough to get the data and get the average that you need. There are some other long-term that you can set for like weeks at a time. From the research that we've done, one, for a real estate transaction, you don't have 2 weeks to do a radon test. You only have a couple of days, you have 7 days to get all this information during your inspection period. So from what I've read, there's not that big of a difference in the information you're going to get from a short-term test versus a long-term test. And you can go to like Home Depot. Home Depot sells radon tests. The problem with those is user error. If you don't know how to set it properly, the radon test has to be a certain number of feet off the ground, certain number of feet away from an exterior wall, certain number of feet from the ceiling. So there are certain parameters that you have to follow to set the radon. And then depending on what the tests are, what type of test, whether it's a canister, a monitor, you then have to usually mail it out somewhere. So it can get disturbed during the mailing process. The best type of radon test on the market is a continuous monitor, which is what the vast majority of inspection companies are using. It's tamper-proof. You see the hourly readings. Because there are so many fluctuations in radon, it is helpful to see that. And then our monitors also have carbon monoxide detectors. that do a low level parts per million of carbon monoxide. The CO detectors that you have in your house start at usually about 20 parts per million. Ours start at 0. So you can see any uncombusted fuel if you have any issues with your heating system. So if you wanted to test in your home and just do radon, with our company, it's $200. I'd rather pay $200 and have a professional do it than pay $100 from Home Depot and have to take care of it myself. And there are certain things that, obviously I'm happy to do myself, but other things I'd rather have a professional do. I think you had a question.
I have a house built in the 70s, and our house is a ranch style, and it snakes. There's several components that were put together: an old guest house and the main house, an extended living room, and the entire basement is rock formation. Would that be something to be horrified of? When we bought the house,
Horrified? No.
we had very, very low radon test,
We had earthquake.
However, the basement in the various ages have these small windows that have basically been not sealed off, just blocked off, but not particularly tightly blocked off. So in other words, there is air going in and out, and I know there is air going in and out. Will that, if there is any kind of a high readout, would the window escape system that exists throughout the basement, would the radon not vent out with these small windows, which I'm loath to entirely close up? I really like to keep them the way they are and how they were intended. However, they were not intended to be radon escapists kind of windows, not in those years. But you will find also the very old foundations very often in much older homes where the, let's say, stone foundations are not tightly sealed.
Right.
So you have the same effect actually. So what would be the smart thing to do in case people feel that? For example, we tested at the time when we bought only on the first floor because everything is on the first floor.
Mhm. Well, and to your point, if you have the windows that aren't fully sealed, you're naturally going to have a flow of air in and out, and both an entry and an exit point for your radon. We've run into that issue in inspections before where, not to the same extent, but there was a missing pane in one of the windows. So we had to come back and test the radon at a later date after the window had been replaced, so closed house conditions could be met. It's a little bit different when it's for a property sale versus your own home. A radon mitigation system is going to be 2 parts. One is a pipe that is installed through the foundation and underneath the foundation and is vented up and out of the house. You do want to make sure that you are venting it above the roof line. That is something we see done incorrectly a lot of times, where it goes flush to the gutter. You want it up and out, so there's not a chance of the gas getting back into the house. And then the fan is the second part. So if you, for a house like yours, if you did test and you had elevated levels of radon, the mitigation system would be able to still be effective because there are still enough options to mitigate if there are radon there. I think I would be interested to know what, maybe you'll win the raffle and you'll get a free radon test. And I'd be very interested to see what your levels are in your house.
Well, speaking of our fieldstone basement, there's a lot of entry points there as far as radon coming in from the outside soil. How do they mitigate that if they're just going to be going up underneath the basement floor, but you still have it coming in through the sidewalls?
Yes. And I do know that I've talked to mitigation system companies about that, because every house is different, and that's an issue. Another issue for mitigation companies is if you have a high water table, because when you start drilling in, if you're drilling into water, that's not gonna be effective. So there are different ways that they can install the pipes. And I mean, we've seen homes that have had very high radon, like 60, 70 picocuries per liter there, and have had mitigation systems installed where they've had to put multiple pipes in. What we tell clients is after they install the system, most companies do a test. You want to make sure that if you did a continuous monitor when you originally tested, do a continuous monitor after they install it. You do want to wait about a week for it to be as effective as possible. And then depending on what the levels are, if you have a level that starts at 30, if it was me, I wouldn't be happy if it was still at 15. That's still above the action level. Yes, it's lower than it was, but I want it underneath the 4.0. So there are ways that they can adjust the system so that it is as effective as possible. And sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4 visits out to the property to get it to a level that the owners are comfortable with.
I have another question. You mentioned that radon can enter through the windows in the basement. Houses basically have basically crawl spaces. How can it come in from the outside?
I think I was saying about your house, you have the foundation as an entry point, and then you have the windows as an exit point.
No, actually, the foundation is not an entry. Yes, there is an entry point. Yes, it could be between the rocks. These are massive rocks. There's some areas are just crawl spaces, others 4 or 5 feet. And all of the windows are above ground.
Oh, yeah. So I think when I said the windows are an exit point,
Yeah, exit.
I don't think I meant entry point.
Yeah, then I misunderstood, because I thought you said they could also be an entry point of radon from the outside.
No. I think what I was trying to say is that you have, with the windows in your basement, you have it coming in and then
It's an exit.
the ability to go right back out. Yeah. Sorry about that.
I have
That
a
was,
question.
yeah.
Okay, so as a new real estate person, I, there's a house, that's 1 in 10 houses have radon. So let's say I show a house and the person buys it, and disclosure doesn't say, and I'm kind of talking about the other, doesn't say, does it have radon, right? It's not one of the things.
Yeah.
So they don't disclose that. And then they buy the house and the inspector comes and he just does his regular inspection. He doesn't do the special inspections. And then a week into the house, they find out that they have high levels of radon. Is that something that we can get in trouble for? Or, I mean, I don't, that I want to get in trouble. I don't want anybody to get hurt, but like, how is that?
I think
How does that come about with us?
I think the disclosures say, has the house been tested?
Yeah.
Or do you have any radon reports on the house? It doesn't say, do you have radon, because nobody knows.
But it says, is there a test on there?
I think it asks if the house has been tested and if there's a radon mitigation system.
And supply,
I don't see all.
supply the document.
Okay, I'll have to look at it again.
Yeah.
So I think what, as far as the legality, you want to just make sure that you're telling your clients every house should be tested for radon. And then you leave it on them, or say, talk to your inspector about it. And the way I explain it to clients is it's something that is very clear. There's a set action level. So if it's above the action level, the onus is typically on the sellers to test for it. We have people call and, we try to not be alarmists. We want to help get the deals facilitated. We don't want to be deal killers. Although a lot of inspection companies do get that rep. But we have people call us all the time and they say, I don't want to buy this house anymore. It has high radon.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's 1 in 10 houses. You could go find another house you love and that house could have even higher radon. You never know.
Casual, and then you can do it. So is like, seeing a crack or a hole in the foundation kind of like a heads up for us, like get it tested, there's cracks in the.
I think
foundation.
whenever you have a basement, always, like, no matter what the house is, always recommend it.
Yeah.
And we have plenty of information on our website. There's plenty of information on the EPA, the state website. I would just, recommend it overall. Every house should be tested for radon. The one time we'd say it doesn't need to be tested for radon is if there's already a system in place. and you have a recent test. If you have a radon system in place, but it hasn't been tested in 5 years, you don't know how well that system's working. You could still have elevated levels of radon. So if your house has a radon system and it's been tested in the last year, that's okay.
So it's not mandatory for testing, right?
No.
So you suggest that.
And what we do and what I think is helpful for agents too as well, the EPA recommends it. Because that way it's not the inspection company, it's not, your personal recommendation, it's the EPA. It's the same way like when we do water testing, the state recommends at a minimum, this testing be done. So that way it's the professional recommendation.
Right. I actually bought 3 of my own houses and I never had a radon test. I don't live in all 3, but I live in one. But I had a business and I had to, it was a state, mandatory that I had radon testing because it was a daycare. So it was on the lower level. So I never did it for my homes and, try
But
to
every
sell
5
2
years,
houses now, and we
basically,
didn't do a
should be
radon
tested,
test.
Every 5
That's why I
years,
came.
yeah.
Yeah, our house had nothing. We had no radon, and when we sold it 22 years later, we had 14.
Mm.
So in the water.
Yeah.
And radon it's a byproduct of uranium, so there are half-lives involved. So it makes sense that over time it will increase. And the other thing to keep in mind, just from personal experience, my parents, when they bought their house almost 30 years ago now, it was like in the 2s. And then they did a bunch of excavating to get they're up in Bethany in the woods. They did a bunch of excavating to get rocks out, to get a pool in. It's now not elevated. My mom's like, when we go to sell the house, it better not be elevated, but it was like 3.9 and it's very close to being elevated. They don't do anything in the basement. They've lived there for 30 years. They're like, yeah, when we sell it, we need to put in a system, we'll figure it out then. But it does change. And when you're doing excavation, you're doing stuff that's affecting the foundation. Yeah, or an earthquake.
Connecticut's had a few earthquakes, so when we had those, that's when they think it changed.
Yeah.
That's when they noticed it was testing changed.
Did you have a question?
I did. When I first started in the business, I had a listing in a beach community of Clinton. And the buyer's agent, who was very experienced, said to her buyers, oh, this is down by the water, very sandy soil, we don't need to test for radon. So now I was the listing agent, so I just, okay.
As a listing agent.
What are your thoughts on something like that?
That is definitely a misconception. That's definitely not accurate information. And unfortunately, the shoreline is actually the most prevalent for high radon.
High level of water. So it was a high level of water.
That the rock, the ledge. So, I mean, it's not like the house is built on sand. I mean, it might be, and you'll see that erode away. But there are, like, with the little, we had someone that was a family friend of mine that sold their beach cottage out in, I think it was East Lyme, somewhere out that way. And it was on a slab. It's a tiny little, like 400 square feet, like 3 season, not even 2 season, whatever it is. And when they sold it, the buyers were like, I'm only using this to vacation in the summertime. Like, I'm not too worried about it. I'm not going to spend. Radon is harmful when you have prolonged exposure over an extended period of time. So like the amount of time I'm going to spend here, I'm not that worried about it. But we do get a lot of clients that are like, I want, we will go over with them, prioritize the findings of your report. So if you have more pressing items, you could wait a couple months and do the radon test. It's not going to make a huge difference. I wouldn't say wait 3 years, wait a year, but, budget, save up some money, $1,500. I mean, I say that me saving $1,500 is a different story, but I can definitely recommend it. So I think that's something to keep in mind also, depending on what else is going on with the house. If everything else in the house is great, it's moving ready, you have a 4.0 or 4.1, then yeah, push the installing the system. And, we had a whole however many years of it being a seller's market, and buyers kind of had to just take what they could get. I think that is starting to change back a little bit. But to be able to have those negotiation options, there were a lot of buyers that bought the house and had to say, okay, I'll deal with it at a later date. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm gonna move on.
Now, how about radon in water?
So I'll go over radon and water as well. So mold is something that we just started offering, doing mold testing in the last years, 2 years. The reason that we were very hesitant to do mold testing is because there's not exact parameters for mold in the same way that there is for radon. Radon, there's an EPA set action level. Mold, it's more person to person. If you have different health conditions like asthma or other upper respiratory, you may be more sensitive to mold. I'm someone that is much more sensitive to mold, to chemicals, paints, those type of things I'm very sensitive to. And every home, there's mold everywhere. You know, when you start to think about it, there's mold everywhere. So the reason you want to test for it is so that you can see what the levels are, what type of mold you have. There are some molds that are indicators that there is wet concrete material, wet plaster, wet sheetrock, and then there are types of mold that are mycotoxins that are harmful to your lungs. There are molds that are only grow outside and are being brought in when you come and go throughout your house. So the mold testing is going to give you all that information. There are a lot of ways that you can help prevent mold from growing. One of the most common things that we see during our inspections are, in particular, bathrooms being vented into the attics instead of being vented outside. So that's just adding extra moisture to an already humid area of your home. It's very common to see mold in your attic. So for mold to grow, you do need to have some sort of moisture there, some sort of humidity levels. The mold testing that we do is mold spore testing. So we take 3 samples, one's taken outside, that's used as the baseline, because you do need to have something to compare the levels to. So we take it outside as the background, and then we take 2 additional samples inside. They are typically taken in like the hot spots of mold, like I said, the attic, the basement. And then we try to take one in like a bedroom area or a living area, somewhere that you're going to be spending a lot of time. That way you have a broad picture of the entire home. Or if you know that there was the house was vacant and a pipe burst and they sheetrocked over it, but you want to make sure that there's nothing behind that wall, we can also take the mold samples in specific areas of concern as well. And then they are run, we use EMSL for our lab testing. You get a very lengthy report, 40 pages long, has a lot of information. It's going to let you know what type of mold you have and what the levels are, whether they're acceptable, meaning they are below the baseline, slightly elevated means they're above the baseline, and then elevated means they're 10 times or greater above the baseline.
Equal 3.
They do. And we try to walk them through it, and there are some levels that are in the winter months when it's so dry, the baseline is already going to be very low. So we try to explain that to clients, that even though you have an elevated level during the winter time versus an elevated level during the summertime when it's so humid are 2 very different things. There are ways that you may be able to clean the mold. It may not need professional remediation. We have also gotten very lucky that we have this with Paul Wetmore from CT Mold. He's a member of the NHMR, he's an affiliate member. He's fantastic. We use him as a resource all the time. I would recommend, even if I know you guys all only use Schaefer inspection, but if you use another inspection company and they do mold testing and you get a result and it's something that like your buyer is about to walk away, have them call Paul, because he explains things really well. Sometimes you do have a serious mold issue and he can explain it in a way that they can easily understand it. They're not panicking, and his pricing is very fair. He's developed partnerships with other mold company, so he could do more of the work in-house instead of having to sub out. And then also Green Homes, I forget the gentleman's name now, Dennis maybe, he's out at E-Car. So we've built those relationships, and we really wanted to have those relationships in place before we did mold testing, so that we can make those recommendations, because I mean, I'm fairly knowledgeable about mold, but people will call in and they'll ask me specific questions about the hyphal fragments of mold, and I'm like, that's like it's the whole, it's how the mold, like and I can't explain it to them in a way that's going to, you know, make me sound knowledgeable. But Paul can, because he's a specialist and he knows all the science behind it and all of that.
Do you say his last name is Wetmore, Wetmore?
Yeah, it's a little ironic, but
Is he a Bethany or Hamden?
Hamden. Yeah.
I used to be a volunteer firefighter with his family.
Yes, yes. And so his son is in the business with him as well. Yeah, really, really nice family, and they do a great job. And he does, you know, there's some companies that, because mold is such a hot topic, and a sensitive subject to a lot of people, there are some companies that kind of take advantage of that and are like, oh, well, you have mold, so you need to rip out the sheetrock, you need to like pull up these floors and do work that may not be necessary. Paul is very, you know, he's going to do what needs to be done to make sure the house is safe, but he's not going to go overboard. He's not going to make recommendations if they're not needed. And he explains the process of the fogging and the remediation very well, that clients understand it. And he's, I mean, he has talked to many of our clients that I know he hasn't gotten business from, and he's a consultant for them, and it's we really appreciate him. We have agents that have used him that are really
He's
appreciative of him.
always here during any events.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, he's really great.
So handling mold, this is a big one. Ways that you can decrease the likelihood that mold is going to grow. You need to decrease moisture and humidity. So making sure your bathrooms, your dryers, anything that is going to have that moisture that is vented properly. Another big thing is you don't want to put a washing machine on top of carpet, on top of anything that is porous, that is going to absorb, like if it has a leak. Why people carpet their bathrooms, I'll never understand.
No, I'm sorry. And I bought a house years ago that had carpet in a half bath off of the master bedroom.
Mhm.
And this was before I was a real estate agent, I wasn't knowledgeable at all. I asked the inspector, I said, oh, do you think blah, 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 well, he was in with my real estate agent who ended up losing his license eventually. But totally lied, and just the mold that was in that bathroom, which I found out after I bought it. I was in there a week and I had bronchitis for 3 weeks, couldn't get rid of it. I was having them redo the roof, which we knew was leaking into that bathroom. And when they were pulling the roof off, first of all, we found out that the ants that I asked about were carpet ants. And then there was black mold all, I mean, like attached to the back of the toilet, and it was just brutal,
Yeah.
brutal. So we just gutted that whole room.
Yeah,
And I think always, you know, if I had a reputable real estate agent, because usually when there's that level, from us being in houses, we should be able to kind of, or you, if you're sensitive to it, you're gonna know it's there.
Yeah.
Right, like you're gonna smell it or know it's there, and at least we should.
well, we
recommend.
say that when we're training our inspectors all the time, is you have to use all of your senses, and you have to use your sense of smell. If you go into a basement, you can tell when this is not a dry
Certain
basement.
houses that we use you to have a pre-done. You know, if you smell the mold, say, you know what, you really need to have somebody
Yeah.
in here to do your inspection before, because they're gonna rip this house apart.
Yeah.
You know, and you're gonna lose a ton of money. Let's get it done ahead. And it
Exactly.
won't cost them anything if they turn it right, do it right
Yeah, exactly.
up front.
So that's a big one.
Excuse me, are you seeing an uptick in the number of people requesting mold?
Yes.
You are.
Yeah, even in the last couple of months, it seems like there is a huge increase in mold testing. And I don't know if it's just people are becoming more aware of it. If it's because the market has shifted a little bit. I mean, we had people waiving inspections. We had people that were like, I'm not even gonna do the radon test. I'll do it at a later date because I just need to like make sure this house isn't gonna fall in on me so I can close the deal and I'll deal with the rest later. So I don't know if it's because buyers are feeling like they have more negotiation options than before. But there are definitely issues with mold. A lot of it is treatable. And if you're someone that you have a chronic illness or something that mold is going to exacerbate your symptoms, it's important. I have friends of mine that have autoimmune diseases that they've had to move apartments because there was mold, there was moisture, and they were renting. So the landlord was like, yeah, I'm not going to do all of that. And they ended up having to move. And it's, when it's something that it's your home, you want to be comfortable there. You don't want your house making you sick. So when you own the home, there are different things that you can do, like these here, making sure that there's not extra humidity. Most homes can benefit from a dehumidifier in your basement. There are, like you mentioned earlier, there are heating systems that have those built-in humidifiers. So when the heat is going, you're not going to completely dry it out. So you have, a standard moisture level. And if you do have, if you have a pipe burst or you have a leak, making sure that you're cleaning it up fully. That's a big one that we see with removing mold, is that it's not done properly and it regrows. That's a big one that there's a misconception. And I was honestly, up until we started testing mold, I was like, yeah, bleach and water. No, you need to use an antimicrobial because that's actually going to kill the mold. It's going to kill what's behind. If you're spraying bleach and mold onto the wall here, yeah, the first layer is going to be good, but behind it, unless you're using an antimicrobial, it's not going to take care of it. So, yeah.
What is it, in what form is that antimicrobial? In what form? Spray?
It's a spray, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can get the spray.
Another question, what's the difference between mildew and mold? How to distinguish between those two?
So as home inspectors, we can't confirm mold or mildew, based off of the state standards. What we'll say is that is a potential mold or mildew-like substance. When you do the air spores, it's really showing you mold and the different types of mold. They're kind of used interchangeably. It's more of at what level it is, it's not so much of whether it's mold or mildew, it's at what level. Because if you have like extensive mildew, it can cause issues in the same way that mold can. So it's more of like how elevated is it? Let's see, I don't know if this
Mold has a color that we can see. For instance, sometimes in the basement, you see the orange,
the basements are so hard because sometimes it's efflorescence. And people will say, oh, that's mold, it's efflorescence. So the basements are very hard. So efflorescence, if you have, there's a couple different, you can sometimes have concrete that when it gets wet, like my parents I always use my parents' house because they've lived there for 30 years. I have mostly rented, so it's very hard for me to give examples. But they had a flood during one of the hurricanes. And so they had water and they have the level as to where the concrete got wet and then it oxidizes with the water. So you see the efflorescence on it. And then there are some type of concrete, like the crumbling foundation issue up north. They will see almost like a rust color, like an orange color. And that's an indicator that it has pyrite, which is a whole nother ballgame that I won't get into because I do a whole topic on that. But depending on the type and severity, they usually say like 4x4. If it's more than 4x4, call a professional. If it's on something that, like if it's on glass, if it's something that's not absorbent, like carpet is very absorbent, then you can clean it pretty successfully on your own. But once you start getting into, you have wet sheetrock, wet carpet, Those are a lot harder to successfully clean. And if you are cleaning it, you need to make sure it's dried properly. We see that a lot also where they're like, yeah, I came in, I sprayed this whole thing down and the next day it was back again. Yeah, because you let all that moisture regrow. So you need to get a fan on there. And a lot of it, like there's, which will be the next slide here. There's a lot of other contributors to mold that are very easy. More often than not, when we see moisture in a basement, it's because of grading issues. It's not because your house needs a dry basement system. Not always, sometimes it does, but a lot of the times it's because you have no gutters. You have gutters that aren't secured properly. You don't have downspouts, or the best is when you have the downspout and it goes straight down and all the water's pooling right there and going back into your foundation. So you need to have the extenders that are going to extend out and away from the house. You can put different types of drainage in. You can put the French drains in. You got to make sure your window wells are cleaned. These like beautiful gardens you look at, you're like, oh, how lovely. A home inspector, all they see is that's an entry point for destroying insects and moisture. So different people are going to see different things. You see roofs that have moss and you're like, oh, how beautiful that is. Yeah, that's just deteriorating your shingles. So, you know, as an inspector's trained eyes are going to see different things, but there are a lot of ways that you can help reduce the moisture that is getting into your house. And one of the biggest ones is actually from the outside. Yeah.
You said moss, so I was showing 2 houses and both of them were covered with moss on the roof. One of them on the roof and one of them on the garage. Is moss part of mold or no?
Not really. It's you have moisture and you can get that professionally cleaned, sprayed off. I'd highly recommend
Did
that.
somebody else do it?
That's a
I mean,
lot.
cover the whole roof?
I'm talking about the lichen.
It was like covered with moss, like the whole roof.
Oh, it's actual moss, not lichen.
Yeah, so that's not mold, that's just moss.
Yeah, that's like a
It's like a plant.
there you
It's
go.
a plant,
Yeah.
yeah, it's organic.
Organic
It's
growth.
like a rooftop garden almost, you know,
Yeah.
that people started to.
Well, we actually inspected a house down in Westport that had a rooftop garden, and it was for it was a greenhouse. It was very, very cool. Instead of having a roof, like it was built there. It wasn't like you just have a lot of moss growing and now this is a green roof. It was built that way, and it was engineered like amazingly. It was very, very interesting. But when you have the moss on your roof, it's going to decrease your life expectancy of those shingles because it's going to start wearing away at them. And that's why a lot of people science is very odd, very interesting. I shouldn't say odd, it's very interesting, but a lot of people are doing copper flashing because you don't have, if you notice where you have your vents and where you have flashing, you'll have patches where there's no moss or there's no algae or, you know, with the other growth that you see. And it's because of the chemical component in copper. So copper is also very expensive. So, you know, but have to weigh your options there, but yeah.
Some of the houses are designed without the gutters or beautiful look. But they have a French drain, but it's old.
Usually,
Properly.
if it was built to, usually there's internal drainage. So like our office park in Woodbridge, there aren't gutters, but there is internal drainage. So it's going down the building and underneath. Some houses just don't have gutters installed. So it depends on, like I would say more often than not, if you have a house that doesn't have gutters, it wasn't built that way. Like it wasn't meant to not have gutters. Or it could be, like you said, a really old house. Like there are things that have changed over the years that, you know, the metal gutters.
Drain for it, because it's, you know.
As long as there's drainage and effective drainage. It depends on how the house was engineered, so it's kind of hard to say, like, if that.
Blocked after about 5
Yeah,
to 8 years.
Yeah.
So as long as they can use a pressure washer to clean them out, or, you know, somehow.
What's that, Sherry? I didn't hear what you
The
said.
drainage, like they'll have
Curtain drain?
curtain drain, well, not necessarily a curtain drain, you might have an area that's leaning towards the house, and they put in a drain and they pull it down across. into
Yeah.
a lake.
A lot of these-
The
Like
swales.
she was
Yeah.
explaining, some of these go straight down to the ground, and
And they
if
disperse.
if the grade isn't
It's like a
sloped away
dry
from the
well.
house, then it's gonna go back in. But some of them also have pipes that go down and then away from the house underground. It's recommended to have those jetted out, high pressure, because a lot of silt and sand and
Just check them
roots
all
and everything
out.
else get in there and it would back up. So that's another thing they can do inspections on.
Yeah. And sometimes you have a house that is built at the bottom of a hill, so naturally
Yeah,
you're
that's
getting
it.
water. And so you can install swales, you can install the French drains, there's different things that you can do to help get the water to not enter the house. Okay, I'm gonna move on to asbestos because I don't want to take up your entire day. Does anyone have questions on mold before I move on? These last two sections are a lot quicker. So asbestos, it was very, very popular for a long time for construction materials. It is a very strong material until it becomes friable. So prior to the 1970s, it was used very commonly. We now know that with prolonged exposure, it is a serious health risk. The biggest one is mesothelioma, lung cancer, asbestosis, which all have to do with your lungs, your respiratory. The unfortunate part about asbestos exposure is it takes about 10 to 40 years for symptoms to appear. So that's why the firefighters from 9/11 are now having all these issues. Firefighters in general are much more, have much higher exposure to these risks. Asbestos can be found in multiple places in your home. The most common is in heating systems, wrapping the pipes, insulation, which is vermiculite. They have changed it used to be that if you had vermiculite, you would test, and if it was at a certain percentage, it would be asbestos containing. They've now basically did like an overall, if you have vermiculite, it probably has asbestos.
Unless it's within the last 1 year.
Yes, yeah, if it's between those dates, then most likely. Roofing, siding, flooring, the tiles were very common, asbestos. Adhesive, textures and paints, those were banned in 1977. My brother bought a house in Philadelphia, in the suburbs of Philly, which have all, so like a brick front, and then it had asbestos siding. And my mom's like, you gotta tell him you can't buy this house. Like, it has asbestos siding. He shouldn't buy this house. I was like, it's in great shape. It's a 1940 built house. It's still, the siding was perfect, like immaculate. I'm like, no, it's good. Cover it. It's fine. You can encapsulate it, but unless and he was like, this is my starter house. He's already bought and sold 2 other houses since then, and that was only 5 years ago. So if it's something that you're like, this is going to be my forever home, I'm probably going to be the one responsible for replacing the siding. And it's the same thing with like the floors, with everything. It's when you start tearing it up and you can disrupt it basically, and then it can become friable. Otherwise, if it's intact, just leave it be. The most common way to fix it is to encapsulate it. You can remove it, but encapsulating it is a little less expensive, and it's just as effective. If you go to remove it, like I said, you can start to disturb it. If you have any hesitation that if you're about to do a big remodel in your house, I should say, and you have any hesitation that something does contain asbestos, get it tested. It's not something that you want to mess with on your own. We have clients call in that say, I think this insulation is asbestos. Can I tear off a piece and send it to you? And please don't. There are some labs that you can send in, but there are very specific instructions on how to do it properly. It's not something I would risk doing. And if you do need to have it removed, go onto the EPA website, get a professional. There are very specific certifications that you need to do asbestos removal. It's not something that you want Uncle Fred to come and take care of for you for $100. You do definitely want to make sure that you're calling a professional for that. Asbestos is something that is outside the scope of the home inspection. Because just like with mold and with radon, all these environmental components that are outside the scope of the inspection is because it's not something we can confirm visually. And what we are doing is a visual inspection. So the inspectors know signs of asbestos containing materials. So if it's, a wrapped pipe, he may note potential asbestos containing material, and then it's a disclaimer and links to the EPA website if they decide they want to have it tested. And that's pretty universal across the board from what I've seen with every inspection company. If there's something that may contain asbestos, we will note it, but it's also outside the scope of our inspection to call it out. And on our website, we do have a contractor network, which has a full list of environmental companies, EMSL, Brooks Laboratories, ChemScope, that can all do the asbestos testing. And then the EPA website, which can do the removal. Does anyone have questions on that before I go on to lead?
Just want to know more about the radon in water.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about it because lead is most commonly an issue in the water. So lead is like radon, it's naturally occurring. And as we evolve and we find different correlations of things, lead is something that, after 1978, it was banned because of the harmful effects of it, lead poisoning. So homes built before 1940, you have an 87% chance that you have lead-based paint. The good thing with lead is that anytime you've repainted your house, you are encapsulating the harmful effects of lead. Most homes that are built in 1940, I would hope, have been painted once, twice in the last 60 years, hopefully, maybe not. You can also, if it's a concern, you can buy a lead-based primer, not lead-based. Not lead-based. That is going to, if you think you have lead paint, there is a primer that will help encapsulate, and then you use your regular paint over it. We get a lot of calls, and a lot of them are parents that have young kids and they're concerned with lead. Most of the time when kids are getting lead poisoning, it's because either, kids, they'll put anything in their mouth, they'll chew on this, they'll, play with this, and they're toys that were made outside of the US, which even, way back when, the US didn't have set requirements for lead-free. But, kids were playing with the biggest one is like the Matchbox cars and putting those in their mouth. And there was lead paint on the cars. There were also issues with kids eating like lead paint flakes. These are kids that are not, being well attended to. So they ruined it. But apparently, and I haven't tried it, but apparently lead tastes very sweet. And so you have, a pink painted room, blue, purple, whatever, and little paint chips. You're like, okay, candy, and it tastes good. Of course, kids are going to eat it. So there are a lot of issues that go outside of just your house having lead paint. Lead is only harmful when you're ingesting it. So
Not breathing?
no, you have, the only way it's like if you have to drink it, or if you are demoing your house, like you're not going to just breathe it. Like if there's lead paint on these walls and we're breathing it
You'll
in.
be eating it, but
You-
somebody
yeah.
will eat it, but also if it's in the air, that would be an type of ingestion also, correct?
Yes, if though,
Only if the lead is in the dust particles,
yeah, so it has to, it's not.
which is heavier. and it
So what we
doesn't-
tell clients is if your house is built before the 40s, right, 70s, 40s, that you're more than likely to have it. and you're planning on doing major renovations that you're going to gut your house down and you're going to be sanding down to the original paint or tearing the sheetrock down, wear a respirator so that you're not inhaling, wear a respirator anyway, just so you're not inhaling all that dust. But that will prevent you breathing in the dust of the lead paint. Let's see. So lead poisoning is very common in kids because their bodies, their nervous systems are not fully developed yet. And the biggest way that kids were getting lead poisoning was through their water. So houses built prior to the 70s, you can have lead in your water in two separate ways. One, through the pipes, because you have lead pipes, or you have a well and you have lead in your actual source water. Lead is one of the biggest things that we recommend to test for, even if you have city water, because you can still have, in older homes, you can still have lead in the pipes. So that is something that is for you as realtors, you also want to be knowledgeable about. If you have that nervous Nelly client that wants every testing done, you can do city water testing, which includes lead, copper, residual chlorine. Residual chlorine is a big one with, if you have like any skin conditions, the chlorine that they put in city water to kill off the bacteria, depending on how much they're putting in, you can, it can give you flare-ups like if you have psoriasis, rosacea. Those things are very affected by chlorine levels. There are parameters that they're supposed to be following as far as how much chlorine, it's not like they're just dumping chlorine into the water, but it is something that you want to keep in mind. So to test for if you want to do just lead and water testing, it's $70. If you want to do like a city water package, it's $195. And then there are other options to add on to that as well. And with well water, that is when primarily you want to focus on doing radon and water, because radon is a gas. So when it's city water, by the time you get from the reservoir to your pipes to your faucet, the gas is probably already dissipated. So very rarely do we recommend testing radon if it's city water. If you have a well though, it's very common if you have a well that is unfortunately built on a uranium vein, you can have radon in your water. It's the way that you take your radon water sample. It doesn't really matter to you guys, but it is different from how we have to use very specific glass vials. There can't be any air bubbles versus you're doing a bacteria test. You can basically put it in a Poland Spring bottle if you wanted to and give it to the lab. So the radon and water, you have to follow specific regulations for that. And the good thing about well water testing is it's all treatable conditions. And that's what we tell clients with radon and air, with mold. It's all treatable. It depends on what your budget is. Radon and water, there are 2 systems to install to treat for the radon and water. So the limit set by the EPA is 5,000 picocuries. If you have anything from 5,000 to 8,000, it's going to be a carbon system, and those are approximately $1,800. If it's above the 8,000, and they've changed this, it used to be 10,000, it's now 8,000 is really recommended. Anything above 8,000, the carbon system is just not going to be as effective. It'll decrease your levels, but it's not going to be, bringing them as low as you'd like. So an aeration system is recommended. And that I think is starting at about 3,500. So big price difference. And then the other things that you can test for, like lead, for example, if you have high levels of lead, it's a reverse osmosis system. Reverse osmosis systems can be either point of use or point of entry. Point of use would be just doing one faucet, like your kitchen faucet, which is usually because lead has to be ingested. So you can still shower, you can still wash your hands. But you don't want to be drinking it. So you can do just point of use instead of point of entry, which is the whole house. Point of use is about, again, I think it's like $1,500 to $1,800, give or take. And you can do multiple points of uses. So you could do like one bathroom and one kitchen. People are always like, well, why wouldn't I just get my whole house? Well, because that's going to cost you about $25,000. to do the whole house reverse osmosis is very expensive. And for things like lead, uranium, that are only harmful when they're ingested, it's not necessarily going to make your house any safer by doing the whole house, because washing your hands, you're not going to be affected by it. Showering, you're not going to be affected by it. So the biggest thing of that is, like myself, for example, my bedroom's on the second floor, our kitchen's on the first floor. When I am thirsty in the middle of the night, I go to my bathroom and I fill up my cup and I drink. I don't go all the way down the stairs. And I live in a 1917 built house. So there's probably lead in my pipes, and I think about it every single time I do that. And it's not every night, but I've gotten better about bringing a bottle of water next to my bed. So it is something to be aware of if you have young kids, that you are doing a point of use system. If you have a kid that is going to wake up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom to drink water, you just want to make sure that you have the water next to their bed, which I think most parents do. I don't know, I don't have kids, but I think for the most part it is just something to be aware of. You want to make sure that they're not then drinking from outside of the point of use system.
The $195 city water package, what does that include?
So that includes lead, copper, and there's one other one.
Excess chlorine.
Chlorine, I thought you said.
There's two city water testing. One's 195 and the other one is, I think it's 225. And the 225 has the residual chlorine one, but there's something I'm missing in the other one. City water testing. Lead, copper. It's gonna drive me crazy. I can find the information for you.
Just, I don't know if you saw it, but there's been a number of people with their hands up on the Zoom thing, so I didn't know if you wanted to.
I did not see that.
Address that.
Let's see.
That was me, but I think you answered my question.
Oh, okay. What was the question?
Thank you. I was talking about lead in the water and if a water treatment system would help with the lead, but you said to do the point of use system. So yeah, you answered my question. Thank you.
So there are a variety of other systems, aeration, carbon, reverse osmosis. So the good thing is that for the most part, they're all very treatable, which is what we try to tell clients and you guys as well. We all want the deal to go through. We all want the sale to go through. And these are all things that, yes, they are concerning, and you definitely want to address it, but they are treatable. Radon's treatable. And that's why it's really important to test, because it's a gas. You don't know unless you test for it. And then you have the information. And when you're purchasing a house, you want to make sure you're making the best decision. It's probably, for the majority of people, going to be the largest price purchase you make in your lifetime. So you want to make sure that you are doing it in an educated way. And the inspection period is really your time to gather all that information. Does anyone have any other questions on any of these topics? And one of the things that I do want to just mention to you very quickly, and then I'm going to pull the raffle. One thing that a lot of people don't know about our company is that we do have a structural engineer on staff. So if you do ever need an engineer to come out, whether, again, God forbid you use another inspection company, but they recommend that an engineer be brought out because of some cracks that they see in the foundation or displacement, we can have the engineer come out. If you're doing any deals up north in the crumbling foundation area, he's also certified to do the classifications. And it's something that a lot of agents have said, your client sees structural engineer recommended on their report and they're like, I'm out, I'm done. And what I like about our engineer, his name's Rob Barakat, he gives a variety of recommendations. Sometimes there is a big issue in the house and it needs, you need an architect to come out, you need it to be re-supported. He can do the drawings, which is great for the architect, but there are also a lot of ways that you can fix, whether it's displacement or settlement. There's a lot of ways that you can do it on your own. So it's really nice to have that variety. You're always going to get those clients that are like, yeah, I'm not comfortable doing that work on my own. But at least you have that information. And we do have 12 inspectors in addition to the engineer. So, you're going to have different types of clients, right? You're going to have the client that needs their handheld, that wants 3 hours at the inspection. I'm sure that's not what you guys want. And then you're gonna have the buyer that has to do the inspection for his mortgage, just like his 6th house. He's a contractor, he's experienced, he knows what needs to be done. He's basically just doing this for his lender. So you're gonna have those type of clients that are just they want to be in and out. We have inspectors that can cover either basis for you. And if you call and you say, listen, this client, this deal is like holding on by a thread, like let us know, communicate with us, and then we'll do everything in our power to facilitate the deal with you guys and help you. And if you get a report from us, whether it's mold, water, radon, and there's something, especially for your newer agents, you see something that you're not familiar with, and there's a lot of things that you read and it's very alarming, and you can only imagine how alarming it is for your client. Call us. You can ask to speak with me. I'm in the office most days. Jill Schaefer, one of the owners, she's always available to answer any calls. And even if you guys do a deal with a different inspection company and you want a second opinion, or you're doing a listing appointment and you're like, there are some cracks in that house, or this basement has a smell to it, and you just want to call us to ask a couple questions, you're always welcome to. Bruce Schaefer says that all the time, call, ask. And maybe it's a house that you need to have a pre-listing inspection done on. So a lot of options. Does anyone have any questions? I know there's a lot of information and a lot of time. Someone's raising their hand.
They got 2 chats going on.
2 chats. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah. No one else has any questions? Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Oh, raffle. Did everyone who has a business card? Bernadette, do you want to pull for me? Maggie. Perfect, congratulations. That's good. And you also get a free radon test with it. So you just call us whenever you're ready. You can use it for your house. If you want to give it to your client, you can do that as well, but you have to consider your house. Of course. And just there's when you use the code. We don't give a lot of free radon tests, so we'll be familiar with it, but just use the code on this.